Well, good morning, everybody. God bless you. Open Word. Thank you for tuning in today. Not only the members of OWCM, but all of our friends from around the world. We thank you for tuning in on today. You know, we're very much aware about the rioting and the racial injustice that's been going on with Brother Arbery, and then Floyd, the death by officers, or death by an officer, by the putting a knee on the back of Mr. Floyd's neck, causing him later on to expire. At this time, we're dealing with a situation that has now just the riveting effects is around the world. And so as I begin to think about it, there's been a lot of talk on social media that everybody's talking about what's going on. There's rioting, there's looting, there's peaceful protests. A lot of things are going on in our society right now. And you know what? I thought about something, and I've heard another brother say it. Where does the church stand in this right now? We've done a lot of preaching, we've done a lot of singing, but you know what? We need to step up as the church and take our stance and make our voice heard. So today we definitely want to get into a discussion today on what is going on. And my posture at this day and time and at this stage is to give direction because of what we're dealing with and what we're going through at this time. So today we're going to be talking about reset. Time to connect, reestablish a commitment to God's order. As we look at the Good Samaritan, we find the story where Jesus comes off of a conversation that he has with somebody where they said, how do I get into heaven? And then Jesus begins to tell him about the neighbor thing. And he says, well, who is my neighbor? Then Jesus from that point goes into a story about how a man was traveling and how he was mugged, in so many words. And as he was mugged and he was beaten and his money was taken from him, a priest and a Levite came by the way, saw the man lying there bleeding, knowing that he had been beat up. And instead of trying to assist, instead of trying to help, they crossed over on the other side. And in so many ways, that's what the church has done. We've seen things for years. Not all churches, but too many of us, and I'm talking about the total church, not just the black church, not just the white church, I'm talking about the church in general. We've seen injustices, and instead of speaking to it, we said, well, we'll just pray about it. We'll sing a song and leave it alone. But you know, the outcry that we've been seeing as of lately, that connects to so many things that have happened over the years. It's time for us to stand up and reset our minds. And this is what we need to focus on. We are our neighbors. We are each other's keeper. And this is what we need to focus on. Psalms 89:14. Out of the New Living Bible, it says this: righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. Unfailing love and truth walk before you as attendants. The Message Bible says this: the right and justice are the roots of your rule. Love and truth are its fruit. So now when we look at righteousness and justice, it's not either or, it's a balance between the two. And matter of fact, they're twins. They connect one with the other, like wet with the water. Righteousness means it's doing right by people, especially the vulnerable. From a biblical perspective, it means the moral standard of right and wrong to which God holds people accountable based upon his divine standard. Justice means making things right that are unfair in society, to correct abuse and to meet needs. The biblical perspective to this is the equitable application of God's moral law in society. So there needs to be both. There needs to be righteousness and justice. They work together. So now today, I brought some friends along with me. We have the Honorable Dr. Catherine Roel, city council person with the city of South Fulton, with us today. We have attorney Mike Jones, criminal defense attorney. And we also have Deputy Chief Anthony Brazillo from the Fairburn Police Department right here in Fairburn, Georgia. So at this time, we're going to go ahead and transition now into this conversation with these individuals that I brought that's going to help bring about not only some information, but some direction, some clarity, and to be able to speak to some very difficult times. So let's get started. Since we're talking about the policing issue, and that is one of the main things that we're seeing in this earth right now, and that's gone on for years, I want to take the opportunity to bring Deputy Chief Anthony Pizzillo today, and we're going to speak to those issues. Now, former President Barack Obama talked about something the other day in length, and he talked about re-evaluating or looking at the use of force policy and what that actually looks like. As I talked to Chief Pizzillo, he began to share with me that the police department had been flooded with responses concerning that. So at this time, I wanted you to hear what the Fairburn Police Department is doing about the use of force, police brutality, and also what are they doing as it relates to how they're going to have healthy relationships with people of color, or as some would say, with the black community here in Fairburn. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning.
Chief Pizzillo.
Thanks for having me.
All right, now, so let's talk about that. Let's get this started here. When you got the questions from former President Barack Obama, and he talked about looking at the use of force, what is the Fairburn PD doing about that?
First and foremost, I think it's important to recognize what our policy already states right now, specifically with regard to George Floyd. A neck restraint, that knee to the back of his neck, that is absolutely prohibited in our policy. We don't allow anything like that. In my entire career, I've never seen anything like that. So first and foremost, that's not allowed in Fairburn. Our use of force policy states that the officers need to use the minimum amount of force necessary to effect an arrest when they need to use force against a person. But above all, officers are charged with keeping themselves courteous and professional at all times. Force is the last option. If an officer can de-escalate a situation, that's always going to be our first choice. And one of the things we do that goes hand in hand with use of force is training, and our training that's required every year. One of those things is de-escalation. In addition to that, we receive training on dealing with persons who may have some kind of mental capacity problem, to recognize that this person may not be failing to obey an order. They may not be able to comprehend an order. And again, just overall that we need to treat people with dignity and respect at all times when we're talking about a use of force issue. And accountability, of course, is very important as well. When we have a use of force, there's a mandatory review process on every use of force that takes place within the police department. And I think that's a very important step as well. In addition, with a complaint tracker, every complaint that comes in to the Fairburn Police Department is logged and tracked. And then we have a yearly review. So we know that, for example, the Minneapolis officer, I think 17 complaints in his file, that's a red flag. That should have been looked at way before it got to the point where George Floyd was killed. So we have a review process. It's also very important with the use of force. So we can see if there's a pattern, a disturbing pattern of force being used against people, especially persons of color, then that's something we want to stop, and we want to look into that, up to and including getting rid of that officer if that officer is determined to be a problem.
So is there anything, I do know that when it comes to policing, there's always 20 hours worth of training that you have to have,
yes,
in order to maintain your post status. Is there any conversations around cultural sensitivity?
Absolutely. That's also some additional new training that's just been brought about these last couple of years. In addition to the formal training, the classroom training about cultural sensitivity, what we do is have a big focus on community policing. And we encourage all of our officers from the top down, from the chief down to the newest rookie on the road, to be involved with the Fairburn community, because it's important that they see the Fairburn community outside of a law enforcement official capacity. And what I mean by that is we don't want people to only encounter a Fairburn police officer on a traffic stop or when a crime is taking place and they've been victimized. We want them to know the Fairburn Police Department when nothing is going on. That's why we make an effort to show up. We go to neighborhood watch meetings. We go to homeowners association meetings. We come to churches. We do whatever we can do to make sure that people have a name and a face for the Fairburn Police Department, preferably multiple names and multiple faces. So we have that established relationship. I think it's important for the local community to have that relationship with its law enforcement. So when there's nothing going on, we have that relationship with our community. So if something does happen, we already know who to call when there's a problem, if there's a problem.
Okay, great, great. Mike, would you like to weigh in on that as it relates to law enforcement and cultural sensitivity from your area? What are some of the things that you see going on? Okay, let me see, make sure we got. Okay, we're having technical difficulties. Please stand by. All right, we're just going to switch over here and get Chief's mic for a minute.
Hello.
Let me see
Yes.
that for a minute, Mike. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Pastor Taylor for inviting me out. I have a long background in history with this church. This was my foundation church, and I just give God honor, and I just want to say thank you for the invite. Pastor Taylor calls, I come a running. So, but I think Deputy Chief has shed good light on what needs to happen and what needs to continue to happen. There's an old adage that you can't expect what you don't inspect. And you have to have internal policies where the use of force incidents are reviewed. You have to have situations where I think you have to have cross-jurisdictional comparisons of, what this police precinct and jurisdiction is doing versus what the standard is amongst other jurisdictions in the metro area and even in the state. I believe Minister Long and we were talking a little bit before service today. Different jurisdictions surprisingly have different emphasis of certifications and trainings, and I think that there needs to be a little bit more of a uniform standard. There are some basic uniform standards, but you'd be surprised how they vary. Just like Deputy Chief was mentioning, the situation in Minnesota, that there was a knee to the neck. I was just surprised to know that was part of their policy. They're training and teaching that as an accepted policy, which is, that's absurd. So there needs to be some sort of cross-jurisdictional understanding of what's acceptable and what's unacceptable. But as far as just the community relations, again, I think Deputy Chief mentioned it well. You have to bridge the gap. You have to create a relationship with the community. It's not us against them. Prime example, you have, there's a lot of black minority officers that are on different task force. So they'll go and police the neighborhoods, and then they'll go home to the same neighborhoods sometimes that they're policing. So it's not we got to understand, it's not us against them in many jurisdictions, but in some of the remote jurisdictions where, you have more of a race disparity, they have to start bridging the gap. You got to go out and create methods, and I don't know if they want to have a community day. You go out and you have to meet and understand the people that you're patrolling, and from a departmental standpoint, you have to make sure that there's no what they call bad apples in your bunch. And because if you're monitoring your own department and you're doing these community relations and community outreach or whatever they create, and you evaluating your own department, and they know the ones who don't like black folks. They know the ones who have the use of force histories. They know who those officers are, and I'll say this, 90% of most of the officers are good folks, and I commend those because it's a very tough job. Again, I've been doing defense, attorney work for a long time, not as much recently, but, most of the time you come across situations and people just want to do the same objective, which is get to a just end result of handling whatever that situation is. But within that department, there has to be that internal mechanism and it starts from the top down, of evaluating your people and making a decision as to, okay, I know that this is a high-risk situation, not because they have a 15, 16, 17 incident reports as the one in Minnesota. That's absurd. Well, because just simple stuff. You know, you're going out and just routine patrolling, and, you know, you can observe the folks who are calm, relaxed, and look at this. Yeah, it's a job, but you're dealing with people. You're dealing with people, and there has to be some kind of relationship there, because at the end of the day, and I think that's why so many young people revolt, is because, you know, there's a spirit of, this is my neighborhood. How are you going to come over here and tell us how to move, act, live, and you never even been over here except to come over here and lock us up? Well, I think the thing to do is come out there. I've seen some videos, you know, on Facebook, the guys, some of the police officers, they out shooting basketball with guys and making, you know, running foot races and having fun with them. So when it's time for those officers to come back into the community, there'll be much more, the community is much more receptive because they've already seen them in a positive light. They can't wait until, you know, some tragedy is happening. They're coming in and knocking everybody down, throwing them to the ground, and they're going to get revolt, you know, from that standpoint. So I think we have to start, you know, being creative and creating and bridging that gap, creating that relationship, like you said, Pastor, and creating that balance approach, you know. But I think one of the largest points, though, is that cross-jurisdictional training and understanding of what that minimum standard is, because we have so many different branches of police. You got marshals, you got sheriffs, you have the city police, you got the county police, you have the Georgia State Patrol. And, you know, as an attorney, we come in and we see all of the different facets, you know, but a lot of times the officers within themselves, they sometimes, you know, they do collaborate, but a lot of times they don't necessarily collaborate in terms of what's acceptable, what works, you know, how to bridge that gap. And especially when it comes down to use of force techniques, what, you know, is borderline, what you should stay away from. But that's my show.
So when we have, since you're talking about that, so what is to be done when you have had an officer that has crossed the line? Because one thing you can't stop, I don't care what organization you're in, you can't stop anybody from going rogue. That's it. I mean, whether it's in the police department, whether it's in the church, whether it's in a regular business, you can't stop an individual from going rogue. But what are some of the safeguards that you have for that, number one? And you might have spoke to it earlier. And number two, if there is an issue, what can since you're talking about crossing over with different agencies, what is it that the people can do? If we're saying holding them accountable, how can they be held accountable? And if they don't get the proper response, then what are the next steps? So I'll go with you, Deputy Chief, and then I'll come back to you with that.
So, speaking to that, the first point, been made aware just over this weekend of a really interesting policy idea that we're going to be discussing this week. And it's the idea of a duty to intervene. And this is something that is kind of a new concept to me, where the idea is we actually put it into policy where if an officer observes another officer using excessive force or doing something that's outside the line, that we actually codify it in policy and say that any other officer there has a duty to intervene and stop that excessive force from happening. I think it's a really, really great idea. A friend of mine in Texas actually put me onto that just over this past couple days. And that really spoke to me when I read that policy. I think it's a great idea. I think in law enforcement, it's always been implied that an officer should stop another officer from misconduct. But we want to put it into policy. I think it's a great idea. We're going to be looking at that this week.
Now, when you talk about that, Chief, we know that what is not being said is for so many years has been that blue code, you know, that iron code of the brotherhood.
Blue wall of silence.
There you go. That I know you're doing wrong, but because we both wear the uniform, where does that stand now as it relates to this new concept that you're looking at? If I'm an officer and I'm with you and I see you going too far, how does that play out of covering one another when we have something horrific going on like this?
I think what's going on in the nation right now is hopefully going to have the impact of empowering officers to feel more comfortable to speak up and speak out when they see something going on, or if they observe misconduct, where they're going to be comfortable coming forward and say, I saw this and it's wrong, because they know that what we learned in Minneapolis is that even if you didn't have your knee on that man's neck, if you stood 5 feet over there and watched it happen, you could be charged too. So I think that is what's going to let these officers know it's not okay to remain silent. You've got to come forward. You've got to intervene and stop misconduct or excessive force when you see it. And hopefully we can have a partnership with not only the leadership within the police department, but obviously it's important for elected officials, the mayors, the city council peoples, the county officials, to have that relationship as well with the police department, and make sure that policy review takes place. Best practice procedures take place. Actually, one of the things we were discussing before was Fairburn, for example, is a state certified agency. So every couple of years, there's a voluntary certification program that we are evaluated for best practices, policies being in place that need to be in place, and these standards are updated with the times. One of the things that was added again more recently was the idea of the neck restraints, and that you have to have a specific policy authorizing or deauthorizing neck restraints, and of course we deauthorize them. We don't want neck restraints being used. And that's just one of many, many levels of how we can make sure that accountability takes place, not only within the police department, but externally with our elected officials and the community at large.
So now I made mention of, so when we do have an officer that has gone rogue, what should the person do that files a complaint to ensure that something will be done? What should they do? And then I'm going to come back to you with that, because we know that there's crossing of lines that you're talking about, different agencies. But for Fairburn, for the citizens that are watching in Fairburn, if something like that was to happen, what is the process? What do they do?
Definitely, first of all, file a complaint. That's the most important thing. If they observe an officer do something wrong, we encourage everyone to file a complaint. The problem is, over the years, we've had people that we've spoken to that had this idea that, well, if I complain, nothing's going to happen. And nothing could be further from the truth. Our internal affairs investigator, who's in charge of complaints, she's a black woman, and she takes this stuff very seriously and personally. You know, she has said before that this is something that she takes seriously. She's part of that community. She's kind of got one foot in both, in law enforcement as well as being a person of color. So number one, file a complaint. Follow up on that. Don't just file the complaint and say, all right, well, I've done my due diligence, you know. Okay. Circle back around a week later, a month later, once it's been done and you've been contacted back, because any professional police department should contact you back and say, this is our findings, this is the results of what we saw. If you don't get contacted back, then it's up to you to contact again and say, what happened? What's the results? And if you don't get the desired outcome, at that point, of course, now again, we'll switch it up to elected officials. You know, obviously you could talk to the chief, talk to the command staff of the police department. If that doesn't get you the what am I trying to say here? The outcome that you're looking for, or at least an explanation that satisfies you, again, is always the next step is to move up the line. So again, elected officials come in at that point, and then obviously, you know, you may need an attorney. So kind of either side of the stage here.
So elected officials, I know you've been quiet. So let's weigh in on that, and I still want to get back to you on that, Mike. On about how do we hold elected officials accountable?
As we talk about this particular conversation, as you know, mayors and councils actually are responsible for hiring your police chief. And so if the culture in the police department is not such that it's transparent and accountable to the citizens, that's a conversation you need to have with your elected leaders. So that's one step. And so I think having conversations, I think you're beginning to see that across the country, where elected officials and police chiefs are having dialogue about what their policies. I think that's important because the public should know.
Okay. Now, across those lines of different agencies, would that still apply, that process that Deputy Chief was talking about, going to, if there is one that goes rogue, to go to their department, make their complaint, and so forth, so on? Is that something that goes across all lines?
I want to make sure I understand the question. So are you asking if there's an issue in one particular precinct or jurisdiction, but it's observed from an outside agency?
Well, no, what I'm asking is, since we're talking about different agencies,
okay,
And one, as you said earlier, some agencies have a different use of force or a different approach to what they do, and it needs to be laterally across the board. But if there is one that goes rogue, is there a difference in how a person should say, okay, this person did this, this officer did this? Is there a difference when you come to different agencies, or is it basically the same?
Well, I think in terms of the accountability, the process is similar across all jurisdictions. First of all, you have to understand what jurisdiction you're dealing with and who they have to answer to. If you're talking about a city, a municipal police, for instance, City of Fairfield, that's going to be under the mayor and city council. You know, if you're talking about a county police officer, then of course that accountability, you know, would go with the county administration or the commissioner's office. So you're talking, you know, the state patrol, that's a whole different jurisdiction. So you have to understand the you know, line or chain of command within the particular jurisdiction to be able to make that complaint per se. Because I understand, I mean, something happens and, you know, it's an assumption that if you make a complaint within that department, it's just going to fall on deaf ears. I get that. I think what we have to start doing is not only understanding, you know, the chain of command in terms of what jurisdiction we're dealing with, but also, and those administrations within that chain of command. I think we also have to start bringing in people like the state reps. State reps typically handle an entire geographical area. So the state reps are going to be in contact with the mayors, various mayors within their jurisdiction. They're going to be in contact with county commissioners. They're going to be in contact, you know, with various different officials. So I think a good forum would be a state rep. And I think we have to start creating an avenue for people, you know, to simplify that whole process of whether it be a complaint, whether it be some kind of communication. I know traditionally it's coming down to some of the meetings downtown. You know, it's 2020. I think we need to kind of simplify that. There's a lot of online mechanisms and protocol. I'm sure there's some stuff there, but as the state reps and some of the local government elected officials, we have to educate the community on how to approach them if there are issues existing. You know, because a lot of people, especially your elderly, they're not going to get up and go down to some city council meeting, you know, miles. I mean, a lot of people just not going to do that. I think if again, I know a lot of the state reps now, I know a lot of them personally, that they do have email addresses, online presence. So a lot of that is happening already, but I think we can consolidate it. You know, if there was a consolidated you know, website or email or something for the entire geographical area where you can streamline it. Now, of course, you know, that has to be managed and so forth, but we got to bridge the gap in communication. I think something else the community needs to do as well, and this is important. We need to understand what the officers can and can't do within their authority. The concept of what qualified immunity is, the concept of official immunity, which is another name for qualified immunity. And what that means is an officer, as long as he's acting within his ministerial duties, what he was trained to do, then he can't be necessarily charged and sued, and so to speak.
So is this why we see what happened? And I know we're running out of time, and this has been very good. And I know this is a conversation that's going to go on, so just bear with us. We're probably going to go over just a little bit. But the question that's come up, why wasn't the officer charged first degree opposed to second degree? It was at third degree, then they moved to second degree. Why wasn't he charged first degree?
Well, again, it falls under the concept of qualified or official immunity, is that because you have someone acting in their job duty, there's a certain protection there. So in order to charge somebody with first degree, you have to be able to prove that there was premeditation. And that's a very difficult task to do when somebody's basically routine and doing their routine police duty, and they're acting in their official capacity. So that you have to be careful too with, you know, the charges, because if you hang your hat on a charge, a first degree that requires premeditation, that jeopardizes the chances of going and convicting that person. So these prosecutors, they're very clever and they're very strategic about how to charge them, but you have to be very careful because, you know, in that situation, it's going to be very difficult to prove that somebody came to work and premeditated, you know, came out and acted and actually intentionally premeditated, performed an act to intentionally kill someone. That's going to be very difficult.
Okay.
But one thing that again, I think the community, we have to bridge the gap of education and understanding what qualified official immunity means in terms of, okay, one thing is that the officer can come out and patrol, they can, you know, they can detain or whatever, but we need to understand where's the line. And when that line is crossed, we need to be educated enough as a community to be able to reach out to some of the state reps and some folks who can hold them accountable instead of waiting until there's 14, 15, 16, 17 incidents and then, you know, something like this happens. So it has to happen much earlier than that.
So now let's switch now to elected officials now. We've heard the term, and I said it earlier, about holding our elected officials accountable. We do know that when people are running for office, like we got voting coming up on Tuesday. So I'm going to throw a few things at you. We'll kind of end this segment just talking about this. How do I select a good candidate other than I've always heard the name? And then what do I need to look for? Okay. And then how do I hold them accountable? Because the feeling is, okay, well, once they get in office, because they promise everything when they're running, okay? But then when they get in the office, things shift. Right. Can you speak to why that shifts, and can you speak to then how do we hold them accountable once they do get into office?
I think the first thing, you want to make sure you're well educated when you're heading to vote. In Fulton County, we're fortunate you can go to Fulton County's website, Elections and Registration, and get a copy of the ballot. You should pull that ballot down and study it. It'll tell you everybody who's running. You know, we have so much technology. You need to Google those candidates, find out what you can about them. Usually, in particularly municipal elections, there are organizations out there who submit surveys and ask elected officials to respond. Are they responding? Are they asking questions to find out where they stand on these positions? They at least probably should have a Facebook or a website to tell you what they stand for. I also think in terms of making sure we hold folks accountable after they've earned your vote, is that they should be in regular communication. I know one of the things that I do every Monday, I send a newsletter out to my constituents, and I post that on my Facebook page. And so one of the things that I think we're seeing more of is, and we should ask for town hall meetings. Virtual town hall meetings have become very popular during this pandemic, and they should continue. Some of these are good best practices to keep people engaged. So even if they couldn't come to a community meeting, they can tune in and hear what's going on in the district, what's going on in the community, and I think all of that is critically important.
So now, how do they hold them accountable? How do you hold an elected official accountable?
Well, we have voting records, so you know, the public record records how you voted on the issue. I think communicating where they stand on an ongoing basis, that's not just at an election time. And so I think key to that, there are groups out there, civic groups, who can also track the activity of your elected officials to see how they stand on issues, how they're voting. Most people don't know that information. And so I think this is a great time for civic groups who are out there to take on that extra responsibility. And ask them the tough questions. A lot of times I can tell you, I've ran twice, asking the hard questions, you know, and that requires preparation.
All right, good. So what I hear you saying is there's information that's available and ready, that's out there online. Google the candidate's name. You can pull down the actual voting ballot, in so many words, to find out the information you need. And then in so doing, study it out, listen to the town hall meetings and the other things that are going on when they are running. And that there is a recording going on of the votes that go along with that individual. Is there anything else that a person needs to know, because Tuesday, the voting's going on? And the reason why I find that this is that we're adding a little bit more time here. The reason why I think this is very valuable and vitally important, because a lot of people think that if I vote, nothing's going to happen. It's going to be the same old, same old, same old. What happens, can you speak to this, when a candidate does stand on something, they run for something, they're passionate about it, but it seems to shift once they get in? What normally happens with that shift?
Well, what should happen, if they're not responsible to their constituents, you have the power at the ballot box to change who represents you. And so I think what's key also that we need to really think about on an ongoing basis is that at the end of the day, the people that you elect are responsible, and our city clerks, they have the records on the voting record for any vote that's taken by a city government. Making sure that information is available to the public. One of the things we did is we promoted OpenGov in our city. And so, you literally can go online, look at the meeting, and the vote is right there. You have to be actively engaged in making sure that your elected officials are doing the right thing. So, I mean, it's a two-way street. Participating in the electoral process is not just on election day and casting a vote. And I want to encourage people. I've heard, a number of people who said they, submitted their absentee ballots and they haven't received them yet. Be prepared to go vote on next Tuesday. And go into it expecting that it may take longer than usual. We have new equipment, but it's important. It's critically important.
Now, I have heard that through conversation with others, that sometimes a candidate can get in and they're passionate about things, but then they also have to convince others that help pass certain things to go in that direction. Does that happen as well?
Absolutely.
Okay. I think that'd be good for you to speak to that.
Well, I think that's important for people who serve together to have positive working relationships. No one elected official does this by themselves. It usually requires a certain number of people on council to vote in support to pass something. So you have to also be advocating and educating your colleagues while you're trying to move a particular issue forward. So it's not just, educating the public. Sometimes we have to educate our colleagues on council. And so I think having those town hall meetings, talking about issues, listening to different perspectives, that's how you also make legislation better.
That's good. Because in this time, it's vitally important, ladies and gentlemen, that we vote for what's valuable to us instead of it being a party issue. I've always voted Democrat. My grandmama voted Democrat, so I'm going, I'm a vote Democrat until I die. Or I'm a Republican, or I'm a right wing or left wing. At this season, in this new season that we're in, you need to vote what is valuable to you. And it may cross over certain lines. It may not be all Democrat. It may not be all Republican. It may not all be right or left wing. It may not be a gender issue. Some people vote if it's a woman, I'm not going to vote. Or it's a black or a black person, and I don't trust black people, so I'm not going to vote. Or they're not going to do anything. You can't go with those types of twisted thinking anymore. You have to educate yourself. And this is the reason why we're having this session on today, for you to educate yourself and find out the issues, find out what is needed to be voted upon, and vote those things that are very needful for you. Not just racism, which is serious systemic racism, but also clean water and other things. We're dealing with medications, and we have some of our elderly that they can't pay for their medications because they're astronomical in price. I mean, there's so many things that we need to be zeroing in on in connection with what we're outraged about. So now, when it comes to the voting, and it comes to who, some people always look at the presidential side. But we need to focus more on the low-hanging fruit.
Right.
What would they be?
Well, the reality is, people do. They focus on, the presidential elections, and many people don't vote outside of those election cycles. But the reality is the things that are happening in your community are impacted by people at the local level. So it is your city council, it's your district attorney, it's your judges. On the ballot on Tuesday, we're voting from everything from Georgia Supreme Court judges, Fulton County Superior Court judges, probate, state reps. This is a long ballot. It's a lot of people on this ballot. And so I really want to encourage people to take the time over the next couple of days to put that ballot down for Fulton County elections and voter registration in Google. We've been fortunate this election cycle. There have been numerous virtual town hall candidates forums, so you can hear directly from the candidates, and they're discussing it with other people who are vying for your vote. And I think taking the time to watch some of those town halls will they're very insightful.
All right, great. Well, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Now, this conversation can go on, and I know there's a lot of questions that are popping up in your minds, and I know you wish, Lord, I tell you, I wish that I can throw a question out there and ask that panel, because I really want to get some answers. But you know what? It's very imperative, ladies and gentlemen, people of God, that you do your homework, that you don't allow the lazy way of doing things to just vote for somebody because your mama voted for them. Do your homework to know what it is that they stand for, and that you can be that type of person to support what they stand for, so you'll know why you voted for them. If there's a challenge with your police department, make sure that you go through the due process. And what I mean by that is getting in touch with your law enforcement agency and dealing with that and making your complaints if there is. Now, not only on the side of the complaint, but a positive recommendation. If the officers have done some things that have affected your community in the positive way. Once again, every officer is not bad. Every fireman is not bad. But we do need to deal with the issues that are going on so that we will not perpetually keep going through this over and over again. Well, ladies and gentlemen, our time is up as it relates to this segment. And we're going to be coming back on at a later date to do some more discussing about some things. I'm at a position right now where I feel that it's vitally important for us to really focus on what it is that we need to be doing from the church perspective. It's vitally important right now. We can no longer sit and just sing songs of Zion and not do what needs to be done. Vitally important that we do that. And as we do that as a church committee, I am committed to doing this. For years, I didn't myself talk about a lot of political issues, and for all kinds of reasons. But you know what? I'm telling you, I've made up my mind as a faith leader in my community. I made up my mind as a pastor that I'm definitely pastoring the greatest church in the world, Open Word Christian Ministries. I made it my business to change the flow and to deal with things head on so that we could be a responsible ministry. And we can not just talk about Jesus, keep me near the cross, but we can also talk about issues that affect our community, because our church is made up of the community. And if our community is hurting, then I'm telling you, the whole church is hurting. So we're going to do our part to make sure that we're very focused on what we need to do. So if you're with me, let's pull together and let's make some things happen. Right now, we're getting ready to go into tithe and offering. Opportunity for you to give. For us to do what God has called us to do here at OWCM. I want to thank you so very much for your support in what you're doing and what you continuously do. And I know the question is coming, Pastor, churches are opening up right now. When are we going to open up? I'm telling you, I will let you know, but I'm not in a rush, because even though things are opening up, you know what? COVID-19 still hadn't gone anywhere. We got to remember that. So we will let you know, but I'm not in a rush, because I'm more concerned about your safety. As much as I miss you all, I love you enough to make sure that we're all safe. So at this time, praise worship team is going to come in just a few moments, and they're going to sing as we get ready to close it out. Ladies and gentlemen, don't forget that right after this service, we will have things at Epic Ministry is going to be having service today at 11:15 on Zoom for discussion and interaction that will help our teens to help you focus on their spiritual growth. We have that going on this week. triggered topic that they're going to be discussing is, does God care about my anxiety? And so the Zoom meeting is going to be 821. This number for you to log in, 821-8015-2074. That login number for Zoom is 821-8015-2074. So that, once again, for your teenagers, listen. Get them on that computer. Make sure they get on their laptop. Make sure they get on their phone, get on their phones so they can interact. Not only do we have the teenagers, the young adults there, but we also have now our kids, Kingdom Kids, at 11:15. From ages 4 to 12, and they're going to be engaged with singing and music and arts and crafts and teaching. And that number for them, the Zoom number for them, is 841-3254-5769. For the Zoom number for the children from 4 to 12 is 841-3254-5769. And then that way your child will be able to get on and actually experience a wonderful day as we're doing this virtually. Storehouse Ministry will begin collecting items for food pantry on 6/21/20 at 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Visit Open Word Christian Ministries Facebook page for more information. Once again, the Storehouse Ministry will begin collecting items for the food pantry. We want to continuously feed people. And so that will be from 9 a.m. on the 21st and to 11 a.m. And then you can go to our Facebook page and then get more information. Now, for those of you that want to be ministered to, we have a Zoom call that you can go into and get prayer, special prayer on whatever you may be dealing with at this time. Amen and amen. Father, I thank you for those that have been watching. I thank you for ministering to their hearts. I thank you for ministering to the areas that are needed to be ministered to this session today. Lord, while we're dealing with racism and while we're dealing with so many other things, economic disparities and all of the things that are going on in our lives right now, we thank you for your wisdom and your guidance. We thank you, Lord, that we will be able to be on the forefront of this movement of making sure that people understand the value of making their voice heard, that we do peaceful protests, and that we do what we need to do to ensure that change comes. We're in a new normal right now, and so we want to make sure that we do that. Remember, righteousness and justice, they run together, so we don't want to kill the other one for the other one. We want to make sure that we do both.